veterans living in the United States today. 19 million men and women who've lived extraordinary lives. 19 million stories worth telling. Stories about big wars and small gestures. These are the Americans who witnessed history. These are the wars as seen through their eyes. These are the stories of veterans from World War I, World War II, and the Korean, Vietnam, and Persian Gulf Wars. Each day, we lose 1,500 of those who served, and we lose more of our history as their stories go untold.
Recording those stories is a part of America's history. The entire story will come together when you tell your part of it.
Millions of Americans. Millions of stories. Tell your story. Ask others theirs. There's no story or sacrifice too small.
I urge all Americans, veterans and non-veterans alike, to participate in this very, very important project. Veterans help to shape our nation's future. And only by understanding what they did for us can we truly understand the price of freedom.
Hello, my name is Frank Boring. I am the Director of Oral History at the Michigan Military Preservation Society. We are a nonprofit organization that's building the Michigan Military Air, Land, and Sea Museum at the Gerald R. Ford International Airport. What you've just seen is an excerpt from a promotional film that was put out by the Library of Congress Veterans History Project. The Library of Congress Veterans History Project is an attempt to gather material, oral histories, documents, diaries, letters from all over the country of our veterans. Here at the Michigan Military Museum, we are a partner archive with the Library of Congress. What this means is that all the materials that we gather stay here in Michigan. We identify them, we put them into a database, and we will make them available to future generations to access through our website. What you're about to see is a raw, uncut oral history interview. At some later date, we will actually edit these and make them available through the schools. At this point, you will have an opportunity to see what it's like to have an actual oral history interview. These will be going on each week with a different veteran. We hope you enjoy. Ken, it is particularly a pleasure for me to conduct this oral history with you because we're going to be talking about China, which is where I was born, and you and I have had an opportunity to talk in detail, and so I'm looking forward to this interview very much. Let's begin, if you could say your name, where and when you were born.
My name is Ken Maatman. I was born in Grand Rapids, Michigan, April 24, 1920.
What was your early schooling like here in Michigan?
Well, I've been a lifelong resident of Michigan, and I went to the normal elementary schools. For high school, Grand Rapids Central, and after that, I worked 1 year for between college and high school for Western Electric Company. And upon completion of my year of employment, I went back to Grand Rapids Junior College until Pearl Harbor was announced on the radio, and at that time I decided to enlist in the Army. By January 29th of 1942, I was already in.
Now, let's go back just a little bit with your General Electric experience.
Western.
Excuse me. What was that? What were you learning at that time?
Well, we were trained to install central office equipment in Bell telephone offices. And an example would, some of my jobs were in Holland, Michigan, Grand Haven, and many smaller cities up in northern Michigan. It was a matter of working with a crew of maybe 5 or 6 men who would go in and do all the wiring that was necessary in the central office.
Now, how old were you when Pearl Harbor happened?
21.
Okay. And what was your reaction?
My reaction is that immediately wanted to be a part of it.
Was there, I mean, I've asked this question of a number of veterans, and was there a sense of outrage, or how did you actually react to hearing about it?
Oh, terrible outrage. To the point that I wanted to enlist and be a part of fighting these invaders.
Okay. How did you go about enlisting?
I just went down to the United States Army recruiting office, which was at that time located in the post office building in downtown Grand Rapids. Mm-hmm. And they were naturally glad to see me.
Well, what is the process of joining the Army in 1940s?
Oh, there's not much to it at all. You make out your paperwork, and by looking at your biography, sometimes you are predetermined to go to a certain branch of the service, mm-hmm. even if you would have preferred to go to another one. Mm-hmm. People that worked for Western Electric and the various telephone systems throughout the United States invariably went into the Signal Corps.
Okay, that's what I was
They figured you had some knowledge of communications, or how communications work, or why they're necessary.
So you enlist here in Grand Rapids, take the oath of allegiance, and then what did you do? Return home and say, I just joined the Army? Or
Well, I did return home, but very briefly, because we were, this group of recruits were ordered to report to Fort Custer in, I think it was in less than a week from the time I signed up.
What was your parents' reaction to all this?
Varied. My father thought it was a good idea. My mother did not.
Yeah. So you did you get on a bus and go to Fort Custer?
Yes, we were bused from Grand Rapids to Fort Custer.
Okay, and this is the same group of guys that had recruited there in Michigan?
Oh, yes.
Okay, all right. Did you know any of these guys?
No, I did not know them. And when we got to Fort Custer, we were more or less separated by whatever they found on our application, like where you might be going to the Signal Corps, you might be going to other branches, or so. However, when the separation was all settled, I did know another man from Grand Rapids. In fact, he had been a friend of mine.
Let's try and visualize this young kid from Grand Rapids getting off a bus to Fort Custer. What am I seeing? What are there men running around all over the place? Are there barracks in front of you? Are there flags? What am I seeing when I get off the bus?
I think you're first exposed to the acres of barracks. And then there are men walking around, and sometimes they'd be individually, or other times in groups being marshaled to certain areas where they would be bunked in an area where there was also a dining room or all the other facilities that you would need.
So this is a big place.
Oh yes, it is.
And as I was saying earlier, you're a young man, you get off the bus, and suddenly this is huge. You're part of something very, very big.
Yes.
So they march your group over to the barracks first, or did you have to report somewhere? What actually happened?
Well, you report to, you're assigned to a barracks.
Okay.
One of those buildings is where you're going to live for the next maybe 3 months, because we took our basic training there also.
Okay.
And then in that area would be your dining hall and a medical station, and that's your home for a few months.
Now, were you already issued a uniform?
Oh, now when I got there, I went down in civilian clothes.
Okay, all right. So you arrive and they hand out the clothes, and I suppose there was a tailor there to make sure everything fit properly. And
Frank, you're dreaming. You estimated what your size was, and if you got something too small, you might be able to exchange it but if it was too large, you wore it anyway. The uniform at that time was not an important part of your life, to either them or to us.
Okay. Give us an idea of, in the very early stages here, what a typical day was like. I mean, what time did you get up? Where did they push? Did you start calisthenics right away? What did you do?
Well, we did get up at, if I remember correctly, 5:30 in the morning. Had a roll call for reporting to make sure we were all there and someone wasn't lost or had taken off for home or something like that. And then we did have calisthenics, and then breakfast, and then we went into our basic training, which was, it started out with military drills. And then as we advanced, we got into other things, but it was very basic.
Mm-hmm. So you're talking about marching face left, face right,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
2,
How to
3,
march.
4, yeah, all that kind of stuff. Was there any particular remembrance of your drill sergeant? Some people have vivid memories and others don't even remember them.
Well, I think I just had an average soldier non-com, because if he had been like some I've seen later, I would have remembered him. But at Fort Custer, they all seemed very military, but also polite, and they were not shouting at you like you might see in some of the cartoons.
Right, right. So basic training is going on. Did you have any inkling of what you were going to be assigned to do during basic training?
Very soon after I went in, I knew, because of that work experience, I was going to be in the Signal Corps, but I didn't know what assignments or where it would be.
Okay. Did you know anything about the Signal Corps back then?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. So now that you've gone through basic training, you obviously passed basic training. Where did you go from Fort Custer?
We went to Camp Crowder, Missouri, which was a new post specializing in signal people. And with signal, in the signal department, you would have gone to Camp Crowder, Missouri, or possibly Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. And it's either one or the other for the Signal Corps.
So we arrived in Camp Crowder. You got there by bus?
No, we took train.
Took train, okay.
From Michigan to Neosho, Missouri.
Okay. And was this the same group that you were training with in Michigan that went with you to Camp Crowder?
Not necessarily. No matter what branch of the service you were going to be in, the military, the basic training is just about all the same. And it wasn't until we got down to Camp Crowder that we knew and began to meet all people from that branch who were assigned to the Signal Corps. And they were coming from other induction centers as well, like from the West Coast, the Far East Coast, and so on.
Okay. Now, what was Camp Crowder like? I mean, in terms of visually, once again, I mean, we're talking about barracks again, dining halls, large space, or more enclosed, or?
No, about the same as, however, it was in a rather unfinished condition. As you saw from the movies we had at the reunion, we began to be involved in doing some moving of dirt and cleaning up piles of scraps from a building, and a lot of that activity. That was part of our job at that time.
Okay. When you arrived there, you got settled into your barracks, you have a routine. Was it the same as basic training, or did you not have to do marching anymore? You didn't have to do
We still did the basic training was an integral part of what we were doing, but now they're beginning to talk a little more about what the Signal Corps is assigned to do.
Were you in a classroom setting when you got these, when you were being told about the Signal Corps?
Yes.
Okay.
Classroom.
All right, so part of your routine now is you're actually sitting down in a room with a group of people and you're being instructed on what your job is about to become.
Yes.
Now, let's get into the point where you were just a regular recruit into you actually started to become an officer. How did that occur?
Well, now, as a regular recruit, you have some experience in something that caused you to be assigned to the Signal Corps, but you don't have any military aspect of that. So after we get some basics, find out what the Signal Corps is and what are the functions and duties, now you're going to be headed for some technical training somewhere. And the next thing we did, certain of us had been selected now to go to Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, and there you would learn, well, first of all, basically all the functions of the Signal Corps. We even had a course in telephone pole climbing, and then you go into radio and radar and aircraft warning. And by the time you complete 3 months there, then you know what the Signal Corps is about. And then from there, now you're going to be assigned to some kind of specialty. Mine happened to be wire line, and other than radio and some of the other things, we learned how to lay wires and what is needed on both ends of the wire lines and all of that.
Let's go back to one aspect of this. You were saying you're learning about what it meant to be in the Signal Corps. Did you enjoy learning this? Was this something that you just did because you had to do, or did you actually enjoy it?
No, I enjoyed learning about it, and I thought I'm going to have to do, to fulfill my obligation that I wanted to perform, I wanted to do something that would be useful to the military and our goal.
Now, let's, in a sense, jump to the future a little bit here. Meanwhile, the group that would become the 191st Signal Corps that you're going to be in China, where were they at this time?
They were in all kinds of classes just like mine, not all in Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. They were classes in Camp Crowder and other cities and other posts. And we are, as a company, are not being brought together at this time.
Right.
We're just becoming a specialist in some Signal Corps function.
That's outstanding. That's exactly what I was hoping. So now you're training. Is there a certain point where you graduate, or is there some formal ceremony that say, okay, you have now fulfilled the obligations of this?
Well, and not much of a formal graduation. By the time you complete the course, you're supposed to know that you have learned what they wanted you to learn, and you don't get a certificate of graduation or anything like that. But now you're being ready to be assigned to a forming of a company. My first assignment was with an infantry division, the Signal Corps in the Infantry Division, and then you are sent to another place to join that division. I happened to join the 82nd Infantry Division, Camp McCain, Mississippi.
Now that had to be a real culture shock. Let's talk about that a little bit. You're from Michigan, and sure, yeah, you went out to Camp Crowder and all that, but now you're in...
Well, now here again was another temporary thrown together our Army post. In fact, there, instead of the nice barracks that we have come from the new Camp Crowder, on the old established, long-time Signal Corps Center in New Jersey, we were living in tar paper shacks in Camp McCain.
Wow. So how long were you in Mississippi?
I think about, if I remember, 3 or 4 months. Now we're going through the training of our role in working with the infantry.
How you would operate in
a battle
with,
scene,
yeah. What about I guess your social, I guess what I'm trying to get at, Ken, is just your observations of what you saw around you in Mississippi that would have been different than what you see in Michigan, for example.
Well, Mississippi was not a very heavily populated place, and if you did get a chance to go to visit a village or something, it was just a main street with a few stores and possibly a restaurant. I never saw anything in any big city in Mississippi.
Mm-hmm. So once you completed your work that taught you how to work in conjunction with an infantry group, where did you go from there?
Well, this is a point at which I decided I didn't think I'd be doing enough for my country, and I began to want to apply for an OCS, an officer training course, which would have given me the rank of second lieutenant as we graduated. And now that my application was accepted, and I now went back to Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, where the OCS course was performed.
What was that experience like?
Well, now you get into all advanced basics, and also your leadership role in not instead of being one of the marchers in the group, you were now the officer calling the commands.
I guess I didn't realize this part of it. You were actually part of doing the ordering of people marching left and right and all this kind of stuff?
After we graduated, yes.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
And we trained for that in the course.
Right. So beyond the marching, calisthenics and things like that, what else were you learning? And you had mentioned, of course, leadership. You were learning how to be a leader. Mm-hmm. Were there other aspects that? Well,
more or less the function of the military and your relationship with your men and superior officers.
I guess it's interesting to me that you've been trained now as a signal corps. You've been trained to work with an infantry group. Now you're an officer. And you're not training you to be a signal corps officer, they're just training you to be an officer. Is that correct?
Yes, right.
Okay, that's interesting. That's
yeah, it's not so much the technicality of the specialty you're going in anymore. Now it's the leadership role of an officer.
All during this period of time, were you communicating with your family by letter? Or?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Very much so. Okay. And I even had relatives write me, and it was always good to look forward to a mail call.
Yeah, yeah. At some point, though, you graduated as an officer.
Yes.
And this has to be a very important point in your life and a very moving point in your life. Give me an idea. What's it like to get the bars put on?
Well, you're kind of proud of your achievement, and you also feel that now you can accept more responsibility and do more for your country than you could where you were before.
Was there a formal ceremony?
No, but we did get a certificate handed out to you at one of the meetings.
Yeah. Now, I know you said that earlier on that your father, I think, thought it was a good idea. Your mother was much more concerned, I think, for your safety probably. But when you reported that you were now a second lieutenant, that had to be a good moment for the family.
Oh, I think they were proud of it.
Good.
Yes.
Good. So where did you go from there?
Well, I went back to the 82nd Infantry Division, now as an officer. And we continued our training, but I began to feel that I wanted to do even more than what I was doing, and I applied for a transfer to the Army Air Force and was accepted.
The Army Air Corps? Yeah, right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. It was a division of the Army at that time, okay. And then later became its separate organization.
Right.
From there, then, I was sent to what they call basic training for the Air Corps at Maxwell Field, Alabama, and then also stayed at Maxwell Field for my primary training in the PT-17s.
These are the training airplanes?
Yes.
Yeah.
By wing
Right.
open cockpit
Right.
planes.
So you were at that point wanting to become a pilot.
I was, and I knew exactly what I wanted to fly a Mitchell bomber. And but you don't get into the specialty of your aircraft until later in the training.
I'm surprised that the Army allowed you to make that jump. I mean, they just spent all this time training you as a Signal Corps person, right?
Well, I was surprised myself, Frank, but I was happy.
Yeah. So I know how this story turns out, but what happened at Maxwell?
Well, I went through my primary training. That was 3 months. And then you move into what we call an advanced training, a different kind of airplane, a single-wing monoplane, more power, and also now you get into more maneuvers. You're doing climbing and barrel rolls and all these things, and this is when my instructor noticed that in these maneuvers, I was left with my head spinning, not knowing where I was, until a much longer interval of time than they would accept. So it's called vertigo. And we continued halfway through, in fact, even 2 months into basic training, thinking that I might outgrow it, or hoping that I would, but it never happened. And so they released me back to the Signal Corps. And this is where I now became associated with the company, the 191st, because I went back to Fort Jackson, Columbia, South Carolina.
This is not intended to be insulting in any way, but I've interviewed a lot of pilots, and of course they talk about not everybody always makes it. In fact, they say you washed out.
Well, right.
So, but I think the 191st are perhaps glad that you did, because you ended up now with the 191st. And where was it that you gathered to meet with them?
In Fort Jackson.
Okay.
And they were still undergoing training now, knowing that by this time they knew that they were going to have an overseas assignment. They did not know where.
Yeah, but I'm glad you brought that up, because I forgot to ask you that. Did you, during any of this period of time, obviously after basic, but once you became an officer, did you have any inkling of where you're going to go?
No.
Okay.
And when I went back to Signal Corps at Fort Jackson, we did not know where we were going to go.
Okay. The people that you met with in Fort Jackson, is that the same Corps that I met at the reunion? That's that group?
Basically.
Okay.
However, where they were going through additions and maybe, I won't say dropouts, but people who, the government, the Army knew where we were going, and they were building a corps of specialties that were needed, and some Signal Corps people, maybe an aircraft specialist was not needed in our company, so he would be transferred to another signal company or the Air Corps. And then it's a grouping of the kind of specialties that they wanted specifically for China, Burma, India.
Okay.
Knowing what the terrain and weather was there, and they're building this company now to be placed there when they went overseas.
That's fascinating. So I'm getting a sense of flux, that there's, at the fort, there's people coming, they're going, generally though, they're gradually pulling this together,
Right.
Getting the kind of people together that'll be appropriate to whatever theater the Army thinks you need to go to.
Yes.
Let's talk about meeting the guys for the first time. Do you recall that at all?
Yes, I do. But it's not until you begin to live with them that you begin to start friendships and associations. Because you realize that it's in a state of flux. Some are going to leave the next day or a week, and others are going to be coming in. So it's meeting new people all the time. But as you get closer to the point that you're going to go overseas, now you begin to see these are the guys I'm going to be with overseas.
Were you required to attend officers' briefings in the morning, or what
Yeah.
was your routine like?
Well, we did. We attended briefings. We talked about personnel who was to be transferred to other specialties, and then we still did the calisthenics and the drills, and had weapons training.
Now, Ken, did you have to do the calisthenics too, or are you ordering people around?
I sure did have to do them. I stood behind one of the sergeants who would call the orders and kind of oversaw the whole thing, but we were both doing the calisthenics.
Just checking.
It's good for you, friend.
When did you, not so much when, how did you find out about your upcoming assignment?
Well, I found out about mine in an unusual way because I was pulled out of the company to go to Wilmington, California. And the reason for that is I was to accompany our signal equipment, all the vehicles and everything that would be used in our company overseas on a freighter to Calcutta, India. Now, I knew what my assignment was. The men at Fort Jackson still did not know theirs. So I left the company then and went to California. And there I waited nearly 3 months, checking in every day to see if my ship had come in, and it hadn't for 3 months. It was a Norwegian freighter contracted by the probably the Navy or whatever logistic department would handle that, to take our equipment plus the equipment of many other signal companies, and then there was one officer for each company to accompany the equipment. Now that trip was an experience because we were on the, from the time we left Wilmington till we arrived in Calcutta, we were on the water 53 days. When our troops went over, they were, I think, a little over a month on the sea. But mine was an extra long because the ship, when unarmed, well, they did have some anti-aircraft guns on the freighter, but no accompanying Navy ships. We were alone, and they had to do a zigzag. They explained they had to do a zigzag course.
For fear of submarines.
Yes.
Yeah. Let me try and get a clear picture here. The people going on your boat, your ship, were the officers that would eventually take over the various groups that, the Signal Corps groups?
Yes.
Okay. About how many of them were you?
7 officers.
Okay.
And that represented seven different signal companies.
Okay.
Different types of signal companies.
Right, right. Meanwhile, back at Jackson, the 191st is being mobilized to go and basically meet you eventually. So you didn't go over together.
No.
Okay. No. On this ship that you were on, you had never traveled across this kind of a distance before, right?
No. I had never been out of the United States at that time.
Did you experience what's called the King Neptune ceremony? Which is when you cross the equator, there's this ceremony that they go through?
We did not know when we were crossing the equator, and we had no ceremony.
Okay. Okay. You got lucky.
It was kind of a lonesome type of group. You had 7 Americans, all officers, and all the rest of the crew and everybody spoke mainly Norwegian, although they did have some other foreign people on the ship speaking Spanish. And we didn't know what they were talking about, and our conversations were all with each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's probably why they didn't even recognize the Neptune ceremony.
I'm trying to get an idea of, and I realize this is a long ways back, Ken, but I'm trying to get an idea of these 7 young men, all about the same age, I would imagine.
Yes.
You're about to take on an awesome responsibility because you have men under your command, which means you're responsible for their lives and possible deaths. Was there any conversation amongst your group about where you're going and what to expect and what's it going to be like? Or were you just playing cards and talking about, you know, everyday things?
Yeah, we really didn't know what to expect, Frank, until we got into the port and saw some of the things. We had no idea what India and the city of Calcutta was like. So it was all a big surprise to us to see for the first time this foreign country. Yeah. And notice that it was different. It was a hot, humid climate. There was a very definite odor in the air of, maybe lack of sanitation, but as soon as you came into the port, you were aware that this is a strange land.
Having been there, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Not only from sight, but also from smell.
Yeah, yeah. I think that everyone I've ever talked to that came from the United States and then arrived either in China or India, it's a blast. Right at you know that everything is different. Mm-hmm. It's not just, oh, this smells different. Everything, every sense in your body reacts, yes. And you realize this is not Michigan. Yeah. You know.
And one more factor sure. is you're surprised at the people. All of a sudden, you see small, very dark or black people boarding your ship to do some of the unloading duties and that type of thing. And it's so different than what you might see in your own country, but also in Europe and in Scandinavia. The people look more like us. These are really different people.
What about coming from Grand Rapids, and at that time Grand Rapids was not even close to the size of a city that it is now. One of the things that I think people realize too is when you come to a country like that, the sheer number of people. Did that strike you as well, that you just walk in and it's crowds everywhere?
Oh yes, just the masses of people on the streets of. We were allowed to have leave off the ship, and very generous. We could have stayed for a day or two, but we didn't know where we would. We didn't think we could find a place to stay where we figured we could live or would like to stay a night. So we came back to the ship. But the downtown cities were just masses of people, of these strange-looking people all the time.
Now, where did you go from there?
Now, our equipment had to go by either train or convoy to far north, nearly 700 or 800 miles north in Lido, India. That was the staging area for all the companies, but it's also the headquarters for the supplies being flown over the hump and then eventually over the Burma Road, which was being built when we arrived there.
Where was the 191st?
Well, now when we first all went up to Lido, India, and then we took our assignments, and the groups of men, depending upon their specialties, were deployed at the various stations all the way down the road which was being built and would eventually end up in Kunming, China. It would first connect in Burma with what was the old Burma Road from Rangoon up to Kunming, China, and then we had men stationed at each of those points. In addition to building the road, they were installing a pipeline. And the pipeline needed communications as well as all the travelers on the road, and then also down in southern Burma, battles were still going on, which required communications. And we had stations near there to service the battles.
the 191st, though, the group that eventually became the group that you work with, were they there by this time?
Oh, yes.
Okay. So did you? Well, let's try and go ahead.
They arrived way before I did, because I had the 3-month delay in the United States, and enjoyed that very much, because my only duty at that time was to report in every morning at 6 a.m. and see if the Norwegian freighter so-and-so had arrived. If not, then you had time to do whatever you wanted to do until next morning at 6 o'clock.
So let's get back then to actually meeting with the 191st. You met them in Lido?
Yes.
Okay. So what was that process like? I mean, you drove there and they were all in barracks, or what?
Well, they were in the kind of tent structure that you saw in our movie being built, and their first job was to build mainly build and assist the engineers in building the places where we would live. Okay. And by the time I got up there, nearly 2 months later than they did, that was a built compound with our tent structures and a dining hall, and then many facilities for handling the communications equipment, and for installing and repairing and so on.
Is this a jungle environment, or what was it?
Not so much in upper Lido, northern India. The jungle environment became very apparent when you crossed the border from India into Burma. And actually, and we did fly over it frequently, it looked beautiful down there on the ground, but you had no idea what kind of a situation was hidden in those jungles. As many of our men who went out on rescue missions found, the jungle was up to 100 or 150 feet deep in vegetation, all containing various kinds of mites that could give you lethal scrub typhus, or mosquitoes that fell you with malaria. And that, in addition to the things that weren't insect-borne, such as cholera, dysentery, infections from not being able to remove leeches from your body, and a part remaining in your body and have to be cut out later, or give you sulfa drugs for the infection. As I say, it's beautiful from the sky, but it's a different story on the ground.
Yeah. You know, I think that perhaps there is a tendency to think that military personnel that did not actually see battle did not see danger.
Oh.
And I think if you die of a particular disease, it doesn't much matter whether you got shot or whether you died of that disease. You're still dead.
Well, that's true. Yes. In fact, as many people, as much as the total of casualties, killed, wounded in action, and missing, there were that many people taken out of service, either permanently or temporarily, because of the disease. So to give you an idea, nearly 6,900 men were killed in the whole campaign of China, Burma, India. But that many then were taken out for illness. And sometimes after a stay in the hospital, went back in service. Others were so badly ill that they had to be taken back to the States.
Yeah. Let's get an idea now of your first assignment. You've come after the 191st has already been there. You're coming into a compound, as you described it, which is already functioning.
Yes.
What is your first duty?
Well, our first duty is to get our groups of men deployed to the various stations so they can start servicing and installing communications. And there were main areas in the in the road, where the little sub-headquarters where the people handling cargo would report, and also at those places were places for the people traveling the road to put up for the night and have a meal and be on their way. And our men had to be in these various stations all the way to the end of the Burma Road. That was his assignment of our signal company.
Okay. Now, were you the only officer in this compound?
No,
Okay.
not in the compound. We because it was the headquarters for other signal companies who were installing telephone pole and wire communications along the road, or there was other groups that were assigned to aircraft warning, and so probably my guess would be there could be over 1,000 officers and maybe 27,000 signal men headquartered in that area.
See, now we're getting a much more idea of a scope of this.
Yes.
You mentioned, I'm going to take a little side bit here. You mentioned about the aircraft warning. This is the one that Chenault, I mean, maybe you didn't know it at the time, but this is the one that Chenault set up?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. Yeah, that's the early, because that operated on crank telephones and the ability to send a message from village to village to village until finally he knew when the Japanese were
Yes.
coming in. Okay.
And a lot of the signal people were transferred out of Lido and to work on the border of Burma and India, and they were in the jungle areas, and even into an area of Nagas, who were a headhunting tribe of people.
The actual work that you were assigning other people to do, okay, you were sending teams out, how did you know when or where to send them? Were you getting messages from some other source?
We get messages from various other divisions, people in the quartermaster or engineers working along the road, and also from infantry in the battle areas of Burma. What they need and where they need it, and repairing damaged equipment, and but we're working on the requests from others, what they need in communication.
Okay. Was there any sense of how the war was going in your little compound? I realize that you're busy doing your job, but did you get newspaper? Did you get radio? Did you have any idea how the war was going?
Well, being in communications, we had an advantage because our people were monitoring and even recording a lot of the communications from various places. One of the most interesting things that happened was there were some aircraft warning personnel that wandered into the Naga area, and first of all, they were greeted by the Nagas with their spears in hand, and they found that when they had to put up for the night, the Nagas assigned a guard to them. And then later on in the evening, there were several bonfire ceremonies. And these fellows thought, boy, this is really a hostile thing. What's going to happen to us? And when they could find someone to explain it the next day, they found out that the purpose of the guard and the bonfire ceremony was to drive out evil spirits for them. And then the topper on this is one of the recorded messages that we had on by radio was that the report was that the Nagas had gone to a village 6 or 7 miles away and wiped out 200 inhabitants of that village. Now, whether some all killed or not, I don't know, but killed or wounded. And the message said they came back to the area with 30 heads. And the message went on, we have pictures to prove it. And then they said, in your next airdrop, please include some grenades. We may need them.
It's hard to fathom in this day and age that there's still primitive cultures like that,
yes.
and certainly in the jungles of Burma, this was so far behind even 1940s standards.
Mm-hmm. Now, the interesting thing about that, though, I had never, in the time I was there, had heard of any hostilities toward our people from the Nagas.
Yeah. Now, give us an idea of I know there's no such thing as a typical day, but let's kind of look at a particular day during that period of time of what were the kinds of missions you were sending these guys out on during the day. Let's get an idea of, you get up in the morning, you report here, you have your lunch. Let's try and get a visual of your experience there.
Well, an officer's day may be a little bit different than the enlisted men. These men were assigned to projects of either installing or repairing and replacing signal equipment. So we had to do a fair amount of traveling to supervise this activity in the various stations all the way down the road. And we had to travel either on the road by joining a driver in a 2.5-ton truck carrying supplies to Kunming, or we found out that the Air Corps was hauling supplies out of Lido into Kunming by flying over the hump, and that we could just go to the loading stations and find out where they were going and get on a plane and fly to our destination. And the more we did that, the more we did flying.
There's two parts to this, and we'll deal with them separately. Give us an idea of what it's like to travel by truck or Jeep on the Burma Road.
Well, let's take the roughest part first, and that would be by either Jeep, or more likely you would be traveling as a passenger with a driver in a truck.
Okay.
Now, those roads were just carved out of the side of mountains and through the jungle. So it's like driving on a little strip of, or like a shelf, and down below you have a complete drop-off. Many trucks went off the road, and there was no even way of recovering them. But other things would happen. In the rainy season, the cut in the mountain would wash down and cover the road, and you may have to wait a day or two right in this spot until the engineers could bulldoze that back so you could drive across it. I might mention that there is a climate thing in that part of Burma and India called the monsoon season, from May through October. And what you can expect there is officially 110 to 150 inches of rainfall in that period of time. Now, that if you took 110, it would still be 9 feet of rain. So your road was in mud, in danger of a landslide washing the high part down, and some of the trucks would have to drive on that road up axle deep in mud for a certain section, and it was miserable. Now, the aircraft was a little better ride and faster, but when they loaded the freight, they never even closed the freight. They didn't have doors on. They just left an opening on both sides of the plane. So there was a rope down the center for passengers. If you wanted to move around, you better hold the rope. But it was a nice way to get to your destination faster, although it was also a very dangerous flight.
Well, I was just going to bring that up, is that the hump, as you've been calling it, is actually the Himalayas, which
Yes.
is the nickname, if you will, that the people of that area called it. It was some of the most dangerous areas to fly in because of the change in weather could be sudden.
Right.
It's not like you're flying along and, there's some clouds out there. Stories that I've heard of sudden thunderstorms just appearing out of nowhere.
Frank, I was in one myself. Not only a thunderstorm, it was a sudden hailstorm. And sometimes the pilots have found ways to go through the mountains instead of fly over them. And we were going through the mountains when this hit a terrible pounding on the plane, and we knew we were all in trouble. But what the pilot did was he circled and climbed in one location because he couldn't see anymore to go, it wasn't visual enough to go through the mountains again. And he climbed and climbed and climbed and eventually got over that hailstorm. But we were a little bit worried about that.
What's the sound of hail hitting an airplane like that?
I imagine it sounds like a hurricane or a tornado hitting a city. It's just hard pieces of ice on metal, and it's real scary.
Yeah. The area that you were responsible for, give us some idea of the distance and the kind of the scope of the area that you were responsible for.
All right, let's say the length of the Burma Road that was built from Lido all the way to the old Burma Road in Burma, and then it made a northern turn into Kunming, China. We were those were from Lido to Kunming was our area of responsibility for communications equipment, and that was used by the infantry, the quartermaster, and the engineers who were monitoring the flow of oil through the pipeline.
So when give us an idea of some of the difficulties that your the men of the 191st were encountering. I mean, you've mentioned disease and jungles and all that kind of stuff. The general
discomfort of climate and the terrain, as you noticed in our in the report that we publicized in the press. The jungles were so thick and the mountains so high that our crew searching and going after one of our men who had died in a plane crash had to turn back. They couldn't go any farther, even though they physically were able to get airdrops of food and water and what they needed. It was just impossible to hack your way through to where that plane was located.
Let's actually touch upon that now. Fortunately, the 191st never had any battle casualties.
We did not.
But you did have an incident in which you were describing how you were in this storm in the airplane, but some of your men were sent out by, was it C-47 or C-46?
C-47.
Okay, the C-47. When did you first hear, or what was your reaction when you first heard it went down?
Well, crashes were quite a common thing, and it wasn't unusual at the end of a day to hear there's a crash here and a crash there, and so-and-so was lost. But this was one of our men. He was not an Air Corps man. He happened to be had a job of a courier, and we learned with great sorrow that he had his plane had crashed. They knew the location, and that's why eventually we were able to send a search and rescue party, which failed. We couldn't get to him. And there were so many crashes that were never people were never found, and the plane never seen again. And then an unusual thing happened, and 2 of our men were on board another plane, which knew where this crash had happened, where we lost the first man, and on that trip, that plane crashed. So we lost 3 altogether, never recovered.
Yeah. As the days went forward, months went forward, and as you said earlier, you were right in the thick of the communication. Did you get any sense that we were winning the war?
Yes, we got the sense that we were winning, because when, after the Great Retreat out of Burma,
By Stilwell.
Yes, the American and the British were very badly defeated. It's one of the longest retreats in the history of war. We knew that everything was being formed to go back in, with the United States, British, the Indian, the Gurkha, the Karen, and other tribes of Indians. And as that battle proceeded, we were getting reports very frequently about the penetration behind the lines by Wingate. British general had the philosophy of the way to fight in the jungle is to penetrate behind the enemy lines and then come in behind them. And those were very successful. And we kept hearing all along that those battles like Kohima and Michino and many of the other ones were being successful. And in the end, they were successful in defeating the Japanese. The greatest defeat of the largest group of troops ever in the war.
Was there any thought of we'll be going home very soon, or next month, or?
No. The VJ Day just came as a complete surprise to us. After that was announced, then there was thought of going home, and you began to learn that if you had so many points, excuse me, earned by being overseas or the length of service, you were going to go home first, because there were so many soldiers over there and so few ships to bring us back, and it was a long trip. So if you had a lot of points, you could be expecting to go home in maybe a month or 2, and if you had less points, you could still be over there for 4 or 5 months.
Let's go back just a brief bit to how did you find out about VE Day? You talked about VJ Day, but what about VE Day?
Well, again, being in the communications end of it, we were picking up all kinds of reports, but it came to us through our people in the various sections who had picked it up from their radio or wireless telegraph.
What was your reaction, and what was the reaction of the men around you?
Very, very jubilant. We're going. It's over. We're going home.
I'm going to ask you some what may seem like random questions, but they're things that maybe we didn't cover before, and then we'll gradually be able to wrap this interview up. Give me an idea of. We talked earlier about Calcutta, but give me an idea of walking through the streets of Calcutta and what you saw and what you heard. And
well, first let me say that India is a strange country, and they have their big cities like Calcutta and Karachi and Delhi, and there are masses of humanity there, not only walking through the streets, but living in it. you walk a block and you would find up to 20 people. The sidewalk was their home. They had a bedroll out there and a place to cook their food. They lived there. Now, and then the other contrast is to go into the small villages where the people had some kind of a shack and did their own cooking and lived in homes. And they were also in the villages much more friendly. They smiled and they tried to talk with you. You never have anyone greet you in the big city or even smile, and the place is full of beggars with a handout, and they wear their disease right on their body. They're deformed or have all kinds of diseases, and they want what they call bakshish. You remember that word?
Yeah, sure. The other sort of random question: what was it? What were the recreational things that you were able to do? I mean, did you bring any sense of America to where you were?
At the at the headquarters in Lido, there were areas and there were times that you would have a little recreation. They made a ball diamond, and they had didn't they have a volleyball court there? And then that came in very handy after the war ended, because our duties were done, except maybe getting things ready to ship back. But actually, very little of anything was ever shipped back. It was dumped or given to the Chinese or in some way disposed of. And then we had activities where you could have recreational things.
There is something that was done during the period of the 191st, which you know very well. I got very excited about when I heard about. There was 2 individuals within your group that had the foresight, or who knows what motivation, but they bought himself. Well, the one gentleman bought himself a movie camera. Let's talk about those 2 individuals, please.
Well, yeah, you have seen at our reunion the results of that activity, but they did have a movie camera, and they recorded our life and our activities and many other humorous incidents, all on 8mm film. And they brought that all back to the United States, and they had the foresight again to put that on videotape. Video was just becoming available, I think, in 1946 and 47. I don't know the status of when it became, but they did put it on video as soon as it was possible. And it's a good thing they did, because before our reunion, you asked me to call Casper and see if you could get the 8mm film, and it was dried and brittle and in shreds in some places. So fortunately, they had that on video. And I think we still, when we go back to the reunions, play those videos and bring back some memories.
Well, for the record, let's name the 2 guys and tell us a little bit about them.
Well, there were 2 typical New Yorkers. One was Casper Fabrico, and the other one was James Baskerville. Baskerville was a very heavy-set man. He probably weighed over 250 pounds. And from their language and their the lifestyle, you just view them as what impression you have of a typical New Yorker from the Bronx or Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm. You had mentioned earlier, before we got on camera, about kind of like the Fabrico attitude, if you will. Let's talk about that. I mean, you're going through a lot of heat. You're going through a lot of miserable things. You've got there's danger here. What was his reaction to all this?
His reaction was that as if there is no discomfort or anything about being here. He just progressed along. He did his work. He shot his movies, and he had the same attitude as if he had been doing the same thing in Brooklyn. And Baskerville was of the same nature. Just two guys that never complained. Everything was just fine with them. Mm-hmm. And they had plenty to complain about if they wanted to.
What was the preparation like to go back home? Let's start the journey back to the States.
Well, when you knew that you were going to go home, you were brought into a staging area, and there you maybe for a week or maybe even 2 weeks, you waited for your ship, and you were assigned to that particular ship. And when you got on it, you got your shelf bunk, and the meals were provided, and you were on your way home. My ship went to Fort Lewis in Seattle. I think many of the company men went into New York.
Is there any water left?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Thanks. I'm talking more than I usually do.
So in terms of the 191st, though, did you go in a group to a city in India? I mean, where was this staging area you're talking about?
Let me see. I think I left on a different ship.
Okay.
But I left out of Calcutta.
Okay. All right.
And I think they did too, but they went a different route home.
Was there a formal goodbye to the guys?
No. Not really.
Yeah. It's just that you were assigned to go and you left and...
You went, yeah. You may have said goodbye to some of your buddies who were staying longer.
Sure. Well, the ship that you traveled on going back, was it your typical troop ship, or was it more, what was it?
No, a troop ship.
Okay.
Yes.
Were you with a few people or a lot of people?
A full shipload,
Wow.
yes.
And how long did it take approximately?
32 days.
Was there a sense of, you see, you're an eyewitness to this, and I realize that for you it was a boat trip and you're going home, but let's think about this for a moment. This is the Americans coming back after a horrendous experience. You put an evil empire at bay. Was there any sense of enthusiasm, excitement amongst you 20-some-odd-year-old guys?
Oh, yes. We were very, I'd say, proud of what we had achieved there, especially when it was so disappointing in the beginning to have been driven out of Burma, to have won this great victory. And and we were greeted by people who were proud to see us come home. The decks or the dock areas were just loaded with people welcoming and greeting that ship.
Where did you dock?
In Seattle.
In Seattle?
Fort Lewis.
All right.
I mean, in Seattle, but then
Right.
went to Fort Lewis.
Okay. So the people that greeted you in Seattle, were these family members, or were they just people off the street?
Not necessarily family members. They were just people that were welcoming the ship back. Now, if some people, maybe guys that lived in Washington, and they knew when their ship was arriving, and were tell people, not many of them were relatives, but there were some families and relatives there.
So from Seattle, you go to Fort Lewis, did you say?
Yes.
Okay, and what happened there?
That was just a staging area to go to Camp McCoy, Wisconsin, to be discharged.
Okay. And what is the actual formal process of being discharged?
Oh, you just go through they go through your records again, and especially want to know more about your medical history. Have you had infections, malaria, scrub typhus, or anything? They spend a lot of time on that because that can still have an effect when you're back in the States. I had a touch of malaria, and I, to this day, can donate blood.
You know, it's interesting to know that this is one of those small little pieces of history that maybe falls through the cracks. Potentially, if they did not check those soldiers coming back, they could spread a disease that perhaps has not even been in the United States before.
Well, that's true, yes.
That's interesting. This is probably one of the hardest things to get from someone who I'm interviewing, because it's very emotional, it's very personal. But what was the event, what was the reaction of your family when you finally came home?
Well, eventually we were met at the train station from Wisconsin, a trip from Wisconsin to Grand Rapids, and my family was there, and they were happy to see us.
Yeah. I'm sure your mom especially, since she had such worries about you. Yeah, yeah.
We also had another brother in the service at that time, and then after the war ended, still another brother went in later. So we had 3 of us in service.
Yeah. But all of you came back.
Mm-hmm.
That's wonderful. To the World War II generation, the experience of what you went through, whether it was battle or not, was perhaps a turning point, or a complete turning point in your life, because if the war had not happened, your life would have been completely different. How do you feel your military experience, your experience in China, Burma, India, shaped you as the man that you are today?
Well, first, as soon as I got in, and especially after becoming an officer, I was really appalled at the amount of responsibility that was thrown on you. You're going to be responsible for this. Well, you might think, I never did anything like this before. How can I do it? And when you get the assignment, you go ahead and do it, and you prove that you can do it, and you feel very proud that you were given the opportunity to do something that big. And then I think too, the memories of what you saw, even though they may be faded and a little bit dissipated by the interval of time, which now is 60 years from the time we were there, but seeing the cruelty and the discomfort and the loneliness, and just all the operations of war, I think had a very big effect on each individual, what they had gone through.
Did you feel that your military experience had a direct effect on the future work that you did as a peacetime person?
Yes, very definitely. I think it would be a good thing for any young person to have had the military experience, not necessarily the occupational type of experience, but just the chance to take responsibility and do something with it, and to discipline yourself to accept orders, and eventually to give orders. It's a great experience.
Ken, I had a feeling that this was going to be one of the best interviews I've ever done, and I just got to tell you, I really enjoyed it, and I just want to thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Let me close in. Have I got a minute?
Oh, sure.
I just wanted to tell you, after the war was over, we had a lot of time to do things on our own, and we traveled a bit. We could get a Jeep and go up into Tibet. But one of the things that impressed me was coming upon one of the battle areas, Kohima. It was a big battle there, and there are wooden crosses of where the American soldiers are buried. And there's a hand-lettered sign right in the entrance to that cemetery, and it says this: when you go home, tell them of us and say, for your tomorrow, we gave our today.
Yes, sir. And I thank you very much for that.